The whiskey burned on its way down, a cheap fire in a cold room. Its fumes did little to blur the edges of the memory. The face, the rain, the rhythmic, useless squeak of gurney wheels on wet pavement. I swallowed again, the glass cold against my fingers. The only other light in the apartment came from the phone screen in my other hand, a pale blue smear against the gray walls. I wasn't reading anything, just scrolling. The motion was an anchor, a dumb, repetitive act to keep my head from drifting back to that street, to the weight of a life I could feel slipping through my fingers like water. The table vibrated, a hard, single buzz against the cheap wood. My thumb stopped its endless scroll. I looked at the phone. The screen was dark. No notification banner, no text preview, just the black, reflective surface showing a distorted version of my own face, a ghost in the machine. I picked it up. The glass was cool. The metal sides worn smooth. I shook it once, a brief, irritated rattle. "Fucking piece of shit," I muttered. The words were absorbed by the threadbare carpet, the dusty curtains. I set it back down, the plastic case making a soft click on the wood. A glitch. A notification that died before it could be born. I raised the glass to my lips again. The phone rang. The generic, upbeat marimba tune it came with filled the room, an obscene splash of cheerfulness in the gloom. The screen lit up. A single line of text glowed white. Blocked number. A sigh pushed past my lips, heavy and sour with alcohol. Fucking telemarketers. Or a wrong number. I let it ring twice more, the tinny melody drilling into my skull, before my thumb jabbed the red decline icon on the screen. The music cut off. The room fell back into the low hum of the refrigerator. A small red one appeared over the voicemail icon almost instantly. A pang of something, annoyance, maybe something else, made me hesitate. Curiosity is a bastard. It gnaws at you. I tapped the icon. The speaker symbol. I set the phone back on the table and listened, my elbows resting on my knees. A hiss of static. Then a voice. A whisper, hurried and choked with a lack of air. Don't pick up." I went rigid. My hand, halfway to the glass, froze in midair. The blood in my veins felt like ice water. I knew that voice. I heard it every day in the low, tired grumble that ordered coffee. In the curses I aimed at the television. It was my voice. But it was wrong. It was thin, stretched, pulled apart by a fear I had never felt. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. A prank. It had to be. Someone with too much time on their hands. Some sick fuck with an audio program. My jaw tightened. The thought was ugly. Invasive. I snatched the phone, my thumb stabbing at the screen, navigating to the voicemail list. I hit delete. A confirmation box popped up. I hit it again. Harder this time, as if the physical pressure could erase the sound from my memory. The recording vanished. Gone. "What the fuck?" I whispered to the empty room. I stood up, paced the length of the short hallway to the kitchen, and came back. The floorboards creaked under my weight. My own footsteps sounded too loud. The whiskey wasn't working anymore. It wasn't numbing anything. It was sharpening the edges. I stood in the center of the living room, just listening to the old buildings settle around me, to the distant drone of traffic. The marimba tune started again. It was louder this time, or maybe the room was just quieter. The screen blazed to life on the table. Blocked number. I stared at it, didn't move, just watched the white letters pulse with the incoming call. My heart was a fist, beating against the inside of my ribs. A slow, heavy thud. 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 This wasn't a telemarketer. This wasn't a wrong number. My throat was dry, let it go to voicemail. That was the smart thing to do. The sane thing. Ignore it. It's a game. Someone is playing a game with you. But as the fifth ring started, I heard something else. It was the same tune, the same stupid, cheerful marimba. But it wasn't just coming from the phone on the table. It was coming from the hallway, faint, muffled, like it was on the other side of a wall. But it was there. Unmistakable. I stopped breathing. My head turned slowly, my eyes fixed on the dark opening of the hall that led to the bathroom in my bedroom. The ringing from the table continued its assault, but my entire focus was on that other sound. That echo. Then I heard it again. From another direction. The bedroom. Fainter still, but perfectly in sync with the other two. 3 instances of the same ringtone, a horrifying little symphony playing out in my 2-room apartment. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I was on my feet, the chair scraping backward against the wood floor. The sound was deafening. What the hell is happening? The question was a ragged breath, lost in the noise. The world had tilted. The solid floor beneath my feet felt like it was about to give way. My apartment wasn't my apartment anymore. It was a speaker box. And someone else was controlling the music. I had to move. I had to do something. The ringing from the hallway seemed loudest. I took a step, then another, my bare feet cold on the floorboards. I was moving toward the bathroom, drawn by the sound like a moth to a flame. The air grew colder as I left the relative open space of the living room. I reached the bathroom door. It was closed. I pressed my ear against the cheap, painted wood. The ringing was on the other side. Sharp. Clear. As if a phone was sitting on the bathroom sink, just inches away from my head. My skin crawled. I hadn't been in there for hours. My phone was in the living room. I snatched my head back as if the door was hot. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. I spun toward the bedroom. The closet door was slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper blackness in the dark room. The sound was coming from there too. A muffled, tinny beat. It was everywhere. It was on the other side of every door. I scrambled back into the living room, a wild thing in a cage. The phone on the table was still screaming, its screen a lighthouse in a storm of noise. I couldn't think. The sound was a physical pressure, pushing in from all sides. It wasn't just in the air, it was a vibration in my teeth and my bones. I clapped my hands over my ears. I pressed my palms hard against my skull, my fingers digging into my hair, trying to crush the sound out of existence. But it didn't work. The noise outside was muffled, but a new version of it started up inside my head, a high-pitched, piercing whine that followed the exact rhythm of the marimba. It was inside me, a hum that vibrated from the base of my skull down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, opened my mouth in a silent scream, and then it stopped. All of it. The phone on the table, the echo in the hall, the sound from the closet, the vibration in my skull. Everything went dead. The silence that rushed in was heavier, more terrifying than the noise had been. It was a physical presence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator again, a low, mechanical drone. I could hear a siren, miles away in the city. I could hear the wet, ragged sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I took my hands away from my head. They were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I opened my eyes. On the phone's dark screen, the little red one had appeared again over the voicemail icon. A single, bloody drop against the black. I stared at it for a long, stretched moment. A minute. Maybe more. Time had ceased to mean anything. My feet carried me forward until I was standing over the table, looking down at it. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling so badly I could barely control it. I had to know. I had to. I tapped the screen. Tapped the voicemail. Tapped the speaker icon. The hiss of static filled the room. Then the whisper. My own voice, frayed and broken. Don't pick up. It was the same, the exact same words, the same terror-laced tone. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind the whisper, there was another sound, a background noise that hadn't been there before, a sound I knew intimately, a wet, ragged gasping, heavy, desperate, the sound of lungs fighting for air. It was the sound of my own breathing, the exact sound filling my own ears in that exact moment. The phone slipped from my sweaty hand. It hit the floor with a flat crack of plastic on wood. I didn't look down to see if it was broken. I didn't care. My eyes were fixed on the front door, on the deadbolt, on the chain lock, on the sliver of blackness beneath it. The floor was cold. That was the first thing. A dull, biting cold that seeped through the soles of my feet and into my bones. I hadn't slept. The ceiling had been a blank gray canvas all night, and my own mind had supplied the pictures, the flashing lights, the rain, the dead weight of failure. My body ached with a fatigue that sleep wouldn't have cured anyway. I needed coffee. It was a primal, physical need. A routine. Routines were anchors. I stood in the small galley kitchen, the hum of the old refrigerator the only sound. I scooped the dark, cheap grounds into a paper filter, my movements stiff and automatic. Water into the back of the machine, the click of the carafe sliding into place. I hit the on button. It let out a reluctant gurgle, then a hiss. The smell of brewing coffee, acrid and strong, began to fill the small space. It was real. It was normal. I leaned my forehead against the cool surface of the kitchen cabinet, closing my eyes. Just breathe. It was a prank call. Some sick kid with a voice modulator. The second one, the background noise, an audio loop. That's all it was. A coincidence. I repeated the words in my head, a mantra against the memory of my own terror-choked whisper coming out of my phone's speaker. The machine gurgled its last. I reached for a mug, my hand shaking just enough to make the ceramic clink against the shelf. I poured the black liquid. It steamed, a bitter fog rising into the air. I took a sip. It was too hot. It scalded my tongue, a sharp, immediate pain that was almost a relief. I carried the mug into the living room. And I stopped. A line of pale, morning light cut across the threadbare carpet. A clean, sharp rectangle of gray that shouldn't have been there. It came from the front door. It was open, just a crack, a single inch. My blood ran cold. I could picture myself with perfect clarity the night before, my hand, slick with sweat, ramming the deadbolt home, hearing the heavy, satisfying thunk of the bolt sliding into the frame, sliding the chain lock across, the metal links rattling. I did it. I knew I did it. My mind raced, scrambling for a rational explanation. I forgot. The stress, the alcohol, the calls. I just thought I did it. I must have been so rattled that I only imagined locking it. It was the only answer that made any sense. Get a grip, Ethan. I mouthed the words, the hot mug warming my numb fingers. I needed more sleep. That was all. I set the mug down on the same scarred wooden table where the phone had rested. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I walked to the door. The air coming through the gap was cool and smelled of damp pavement and exhaust fumes. I put my hand on the cool metal of the doorknob. I pulled it shut. The latch clicked quietly. I turned the deadbolt. It slid home with a heavy, final sound. I slid the chain across its track and dropped it into the slot. Locked. Secure. I pushed against the door. It was solid. Unmoving. I turned my back to it, my shoulders slumping with a long, slow exhale. Just tired. Just losing my mind a little. I walked back toward my coffee. Tap, tap, tap. I froze mid-stride. The sound was from the door I had just locked. It was soft, precise, almost polite. Not the frantic banging of a cop or a neighbor in a panic. It was measured, deliberate. I didn't breathe. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, listening. The refrigerator hummed. A car horn blared somewhere down the street. Nothing else. Maybe I'd imagined it. The sound of the lock settling. The old building groaning. I took a cautious step toward the door. Then another. My bare feet made no sound on the wood. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. The cheap paint cool against my skin. Silence. Thick and heavy. Slowly, carefully, I leaned forward and put my eye to the peephole. The lens was dusty. The image had offered a warped, fish-eye distortion of the hallway outside, the beige, water-stained wallpaper, the worn brown carpet, the flickering fluorescent light fixture at the far end. The hallway was empty. No one was there. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement. Nothing. My heart was a lead weight in my chest. This wasn't right. The word echoed in my skull, a cold, sharp certainty that cut through the fog of exhaustion. I backed away from the door, one slow step at a time, my eyes locked on the brass deadbolt. It was still locked. The chain was still in place. I kept backing away until the kitchen counter pressed against my spine. I couldn't take my eyes off the door. It was a predator, pretending to be asleep. It was waiting. My phone lit up on the table. The screen glowed, a harsh, white light in the dim room. An incoming call. My gaze snapped to it. The blood drained from my face. I could see the name on the screen, even from across the room. The letters were stark and black against the white background. A single word. Ethan. My own name. My own number. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. My hand trembled as I reached out and picked it up. The plastic case felt slick with my own sweat. My thumb hovered over the green icon. The phone vibrated in my hand, a frantic, insistent buzz. It felt like a trapped bird beating its wings against my palm. I had to know. I had to. I swiped to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. Silence. Just a faint electronic hiss. Hello? I whispered, my voice a dry crackle. A sound exploded in my ear. A scream. It was my voice, but not my voice. It was a version of me that had been pushed past every limit, a raw, gargling shriek of pure, animal panic. "He's right outside. God, he's right at the door. Don't open it. Don't make a sound. Don't." The voice cut off, but it was replaced by another sound. A sound that wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from the door. Skrrrape. A long, loud, tearing sound. It was the sound of something hard and sharp being dragged with immense force across the wood of my front door. It was not the sound of a key or a tool. It was organic, vicious, like a giant cat sharpening its claws, like fingernails grown to points and hardened like stone. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the connection still live, a faint, tinny static issuing from its small speaker. I couldn't hear it. The only sound in the universe was the noise at my door. Scrape, scratch, gouge. The sound came again, more frantic this time. Fierce, hungry. The wood of the door groaned under the assault. I could see the door vibrating in its frame, a faint shudder that ran through the entire wall. A fine dust of paint and wood particles shimmied loose from the top of the door frame and drifted down like diseased snow. He was trying to get in. The thing that my own voice had just warned me about was trying to tear its way through my door. "Get away!" I yelled, my voice thin and high. The words were useless, swallowed by the noise. "Get the fuck away from my door!" Crrrrack. Scrape, a new sound. Deeper. Wood was splintering. The thing outside was relentless, tireless, a machine made of claws and hate. My legs finally unlocked. I scrambled backward, my feet tangling with each other. I stumbled, hit the edge of the kitchen counter with my hip, the pain a distant, unimportant flare. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon, for anything, the knife block. My hand shot out, clumsy and shaking, and closed around the handle of the large chef's knife. The plastic was cool and solid, a real, heavy object in a world that was dissolving into noise and fear. I pulled it free. The blade was 8 inches of polished steel. It felt absurdly small. I backed away from the kitchen, my back hitting the living room wall opposite the door. I slid down it until my knees were bent, my body coiled like a spring. I held the knife in a two-handed grip, the point aimed at the door. My knuckles were white, my arms shook from the strain. The scratching became a frenzy, a continuous, deafening roar of destruction. The door bucked in its frame. The deadbolt was holding, but the wood around it was groaning, protesting. I could hear the sharp ping of wood fibers snapping under the strain. Any second now, the lock would tear free. Any second, the door would fly open, and the thing making that noise would be inside with me. I squeezed my eyes shut. My breath came in wet, ragged gasps. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, painful rhythm that shook my whole body. This is it. This is how it ends. In a cheap apartment, at the hands of something I can't even see. The memory of the voicemail flooded my mind, my own strained breathing, a perfect match to the sound filling my own lungs right now. It wasn't a warning, it was a recording of this exact moment. Then, it stopped. Abruptly. Utterly. 1 second. The world was a hurricane of splintering wood and rage. The next, there was only the hum of the refrigerator. The sudden silence was a physical blow. It pressed in on my eardrums. It was heavier, deeper, more menacing than the noise had ever been. I held my breath, listening. My heart was a drum in the quiet. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't move. I stayed pressed against the wall, the knife held out in front of me, its point trembling. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. It was a different kind of torture. The waiting. The not knowing. My muscles screamed in protest. My arms ached. Slowly, I lowered the knife. I uncurled my body, pushing myself up the wall until I was standing. My legs felt weak, like they might give out from under me. I had to look. I had to know what was left of my door. I took 1 step. The floorboard under my foot let out a loud creak. I flinched, expecting the assault to begin anew. Nothing. I took another step. And another. My path across the small living room felt like a mile-long journey across a minefield. I reached the door. I stood before it, my chest rising and falling rapidly. My sweat felt cold on my skin. I didn't raise my eye to the peephole. I was afraid of what I might see, or what might see me. My gaze drifted downward, down the face of the door, my side of the door, and the air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. There were scratches, deep, gouged wounds in the white paint. 4 parallel tracks, dug into the wood with savage force. They started near the deadbolt and dragged down almost to the floor, each one a deep, ragged trough. Splinters of pale, raw pine stood out like coarse hairs against the dark paint of the door. They were on the inside. My brain refused to compute. It was like looking at a math problem where 2 plus 2 equaled fish. The scratches were on the inside. They started high, near the lock I had thrown with my own hand and tore downward, ending near my feet. The wood was mauled, the white paint ripped away to show the naked, splintered pine underneath. It was a physical fact. A statement of violence written on my door. But the author of that violence had been on the other side. The logic broke. It simply snapped in two. There was no way for the scratches to be on the inside. There was no one in here but me. I backed away, my bare heel coming down on the phone I'd dropped. The plastic case crunched. I didn't care. My eyes were fixed on the wounds in the wood. A cold certainty, colder than any I had ever known, settled in the pit of my stomach. I was not alone. It wasn't trying to get in. It was already here with me. Or it was something else. Something that didn't use doors. Action. I needed to act. Panic was a rising tide. I lunged for the scarred wooden coffee table. My hands found purchase and I heaved, my muscles screaming. The legs scraped horribly across the floor as I dragged it, wedging one end against the mauled door. It wasn't much, but it was something. Next, the one comfortable piece of furniture I owned, a heavy, overstuffed armchair. I grabbed it by the back, digging my fingers into the worn fabric and pulling. It was heavy, awkward. It fought me. I grunted with the effort, my breath coming in hot bursts. I shoved it up against the table, creating a clumsy, pathetic barrier. A monument to my own fear. I stood in the middle of the room, panting. My heart was a frantic hammer against my ribs. I looked at my barricade. It looked stupid. Pointless. What good was a table against something that could claw through wood from the wrong side? Had to look outside. My feet carried me to the living room window. The curtains were still drawn from last night, a thin, cheap fabric that did little to block the gray morning. My hand trembled as I reached for the edge. I pulled it back just an inch. My world became a narrow, vertical slice of the street below. Rain-slicked asphalt, a row of parked cars beaded with water, and the anemic yellow glow of a single street lamp on the opposite sidewalk. A man was standing under it. My breath caught in my throat. He was just a shape, a silhouette in dark clothing. He was perfectly still, not sheltering from a passing drizzle, not waiting for a bus. He was staring. His head was tilted up, aimed directly at my window, directly at me. This was it. A face. A form. Not a phantom in the walls, but a person. A physical threat. A wave of something hot and sharp, something akin to relief washed over me. It was anger. The fear was still there, a block of ice in my gut, but the anger was aflame around it. It was him. The tapping. The scraping. The calls. It was all him. He knew I was watching. I don't know how, but he knew. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right arm. He pointed. One finger, extended, aimed straight at my heart, through the glass and the brick, and the 40 feet of empty space between us. It was not a gesture of accusation. It was a gesture of selection. Of ownership. You. I flinched back from the window as if he'd fired a gun. My hand flew from the curtain. He saw me. He fucking saw me. I yanked the cord hard. The plastic ring screeched along the metal rod and the curtain slammed shut, plunging my apartment into a deeper gloom. But it didn't help. I could still feel his eyes on the building, a heavy, physical pressure. He was out there. He was waiting. My phone rang. The sound, shrill and electronic, cut through the quiet. I spun around. It was on the floor where I'd stepped on it. The screen a cracked spiderweb of light. The name glowed through the fractures. Ethan. I scrambled for it, my knees hitting the floorboards. I snatched it up. The call was from me. This time, There was no hesitation. I swiped the green icon before the second ring could finish. I shoved the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice low and urgent. My own voice screamed back at me, thin and distorted by the speaker. It was a gale of pure terror. He's looking right at you. Get away from the window. Get POP. The sound was soft but final. It came from outside. I crept back to the window, my heart in my throat. I parted the curtains just a fraction of an inch. The yellow street lamp was dead. The man was gone. The entire street was a river of blackness, punctuated only by the distant red of a traffic light. He had vanished into thin air the moment the light went out. Where did he go? I squeak. The sound was high-pitched, metal on metal. Close, too close. It wasn't from the street. It was from my right, the fire escape. My blood turned to slush. He was on the fire escape, right outside my wall. My body moved on its own. I didn't think. I just reacted. I lunged for the wall switch and slapped it down. The single bulb in the living room ceiling died. I ran into the small kitchen and killed the light over the sink. The apartment was now utterly black, save for the faint ambient city glow filtering through the closed curtains. Silence. I held my breath, straining my ears. There. Clank. A heavy footstep on the iron slats of the fire escape landing. My landing. Right outside the window. He was there. Not 3 feet away. I dropped to a crouch, my back pressed against the wall. I needed cover. The armchair. It was my only option. I crawled on my hands and knees, the rough wood of the floorboards biting into my palms. I squeezed myself into the space between the back of the armchair and the wall. It smelled of dust and old fabric. My view was a sliver of the room. I could see the bottom of the window. Creak. Groan. The sound of weight settling on the old metal. He was moving slowly, testing it. Each noise was a physical impact. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing him out there in the dark. The man from under the streetlight. The man who could make my phone call me. The man who could scratch my door from the inside. A shadow fell across the thin gap where the curtains met. It was him. A tall, human-shaped void, blocking the faint light from outside. He was standing right there, his face inches from the glass. I could feel his presence, a cold spot in the room. I stopped breathing. I made myself small, tried to will myself out of existence. My entire universe was the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears, and the sight of that dark shape at my window. He stood there for an eternity. 1 minute. 2. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, a silent sentinel. The ultimate act of psychological warfare. He didn't need to break the glass. He didn't need to try the lock. Just knowing he was there was enough. He was showing me that my locks, my doors, my walls were all meaningless. He could get to me whenever he wanted. Then, as slowly as he arrived, the shadow moved. Clank. A step. Creak. Another. They were moving away from the window, heading further down the fire escape. Away from my apartment. I stayed frozen, every muscle in my body screaming. Was it a trick? Was he just moving to the next window, the one in my bedroom? I listened, my jaw clamped so tight my teeth ached. I heard the faint, rhythmic clanking of his steps descending, growing fainter and fainter until they were swallowed by the city's low hum. He was gone. I remained in my hiding spot for a long time. The fear receded slowly, like a fever breaking, leaving behind a cold sweat, and a body that trembled with exhaustion. My cramped legs were numb. I pushed myself up, using the armchair for support. The room was still dark. The silence was thick. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. In. Out. A real physical thing. My gaze fell upon my phone, still clutched in my hand. The screen was dark. I pressed the side button. It lit up, the cracked glass distorting the display. There was a notification on the lock screen. Not a missed call. Not a text message. It was a banner from the Photos app. A single line of text, under a small thumbnail image. A new memory for you. 7 years ago today. 7 years. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I tapped it. The screen resolved into a single image. It was a scan of a newspaper article. The picture was grainy, black and white. A car, mangled beyond recognition, wrapped around a thick oak tree. Paramedics working. Flashing lights blurred by the camera's long exposure. A body under a sheet. But my eyes were drawn to a figure at the edge of the frame, held back by a police officer. A man, his face contorted in a mask of absolute agony. He was screaming, but the picture was silent. His mouth was a black hole of grief. He was staring at the sheet. A jolt went through me, sharp and electric. I knew that face. Even twisted by grief and blurred by newsprint, I knew it. It was the man from under the streetlight. The name. It had a name. The face in the newsprint had a name, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection. 7 years. A mangled car. A body under a sheet. And a man screaming into a void that had swallowed his world. The man under the streetlight. The man on my fire escape. Clarity hit me like a splash of ice water. This wasn't random. This wasn't some cosmic joke. It was simpler. It was human. It was revenge. The thought didn't bring comfort, but it brought focus. The amorphous, shapeless terror that had been pressing in on me from all sides now had a face and a history. A motive I could understand. A man, broken by grief, had come to break me. My eyes scanned the dark apartment. The pathetic barricade of the coffee table and armchair against the front door. The thin curtains hiding the window he had stood before. Adrenaline, hot and sharp, sluiced through my veins. It burned away the last vestiges of weary exhaustion. He was just a man who could be fought, who could be stopped. I needed a weapon. My gaze fell on the small, unused fireplace in the corner. Beside it, on a wrought iron stand, rested a set of tools. A brush, a shovel, and a fire poker. The poker. It was heavy, solid iron with a hooked end. I crossed the room in 3 strides, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. My hand closed around the cool, smooth metal of the handle. It felt good in my grip. Heavy. Real. I turned back to the room, my knuckles white on the poker. First, the windows. I crept back to the main window. The poker held low and ready. I used its tip to nudge the curtain aside, just enough to see. The street was still black. The rain had stopped. Nothing moved. I let the curtain fall. I moved to the kitchen window next. It looked out onto the brick wall of the next building. A dead end. I checked the lock. It was secure. The front door. The barricade was clumsy, but it would make noise if he tried to force it. And the scratches. My mind snagged on them again. The scratches on the inside. How? Maybe he'd done it before, gotten in and out while I was asleep, setting the stage. A seed of doubt. I pushed it down. Focus on the physical. The man. The threat. I stood in the center of the living room, a statue carved from tension. I held my breath, listening. The building was old. It settled and groaned. The refrigerator in the kitchen hummed. The distant, muted siren of a city that never slept. Normal sounds. But I listened past them. For the abnormal. The scrape of a shoe on concrete. The clank of the fire escape. The turn of a key. Nothing. I decided to check the bedroom. It had a sturdier door. A better place to make a stand if it came to it. My territory was this small apartment, and I would know every inch of it. I moved from the living room, the poker held out in front of me like a divining rod for violence. I entered the short, narrow hallway that connected the living space to the bedroom and the bathroom. Darkness pooled here, thicker than in the main room. Creak! I froze. The sound was soft, wood complaining under weight. It wasn't the floorboards beneath my own feet. It wasn't the building settling. It came from in front of me. From the hallway. Not from outside. From inside. My blood felt thick and slow. No way, I breathed. The words, a wisp of air. I had barricaded the only entrance. I had checked the windows. I was alone. I had to be. My grip tightened on the poker. It was the only solid thing in my world. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing my foot down with immense care. I peered into the gloom. The hallway was empty. Just a short, dark throat leading to 2 closed doors. The bedroom on the left, the bathroom on the right. Nothing. But something was wrong. My eyes adjusted, struggling to make sense of the shapes. There, on the right-hand wall, a picture. A cheap print of a forest scene I'd hung to cover a stain. It was crooked. Tilted at a sharp angle. It was never crooked. I was meticulous about things like that. It was one of the few pieces of order in my life. I stared at the dark rectangle hanging askew. Proof. Undeniable proof. Someone had brushed against it. Someone had been here. He hadn't been trying to get in. He was already in. He had been in the apartment with me the entire time. When I dragged the table, when I hid behind the chair, he had been in the dark, watching. The fear came back, a cold, greasy wave. The adrenaline soured in my gut. This wasn't a siege, it was a trap, and I was the one inside it. The bedroom. That was the plan. Get to the bedroom. The door was solid wood, not hollow like the bathrooms. It had a better lock. I could barricade it from the inside with a dresser. I could call the police. I could wait for sunrise. I didn't hesitate. I bunched my muscles and launched myself forward, breaking into a desperate, clumsy run down the short corridor. My bare feet slapped against the floorboards. 1 step. 2. The world tilted. A dizzying wave of vertigo washed over me, so powerful I staggered, my shoulder hitting the wall. I blinked, trying to clear my head. I kept moving, pushing off the wall, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door at the end of the hall. But it wasn't getting any closer. I took another step. And another. My legs pumped, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The wall beside me felt like sandpaper against my shirt, but the door, that rectangle of safety, seemed to retreat with every step I took. The hallway was stretching. It was elongating, pulling away from me like taffy. The wall sconce, the crooked picture, the texture of the plaster beside me. It was all sliding past me in a nauseating blur, but the destination remained impossibly distant. My phone rang. The shrill electronic noise was a physical assault in the warped space. It was in my pocket. I fumbled for it. Still trying to run forward in this nightmare corridor, I ripped it out, the cracked screen glowing. "Ethan," I answered, my thumb jabbing at the glass. "What?" I gasped. My own voice, thin and frantic, tore through the speaker. "Wrong move. You're running the wrong way. It's a trap. Don't go in the bedroom. Get OU." I spun around, a scream building in my throat. I had to get back to the living room. But where the entrance to the hallway had been, there was now a wall. A solid, unbroken expanse of brick. Old, grimy, mortar-caked brick that hadn't been there a second ago. I was sealed in. A long, narrow tomb. The hallway snapped back. There was no sound, just a violent, instantaneous correction of physics. One moment I was in a tunnel 100 feet long. The next, it was its proper 10-foot length. My forward momentum, which had been carrying me nowhere, now had a place to go. I pitched forward, out of control. My feet tangled. The fire poker flew from my grasp, clattering loudly against the floor. I threw my hands out, but it was too late. I fell hard, my chest and chin slamming into the wooden floorboards. The impact drove the air from my lungs. Bang! The door to my right, the bathroom door, flew open, smashing against the hallway wall. A shape burst out of the darkness within. It was him. Leo. Taller than I remembered, his face a pale mask of fury in the gloom. He moved with a terrifying speed, a length of rusted iron pipe raised high in both hands. He brought it down in a vicious, silent arc aimed at my head. I rolled, pure instinct taking over. The pipe smashed into the floor where my skull had been an instant before. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, my eyes wide. He was on me again before I could get my feet under me, the pipe raised for another strike. My hand slapped against something cold and hard. The poker. I grabbed it, swinging it wildly from the floor. It was a clumsy, desperate arc. He was bringing the pipe down again. Metal met metal with a deafening, high-pitched clang that vibrated up my arm and into my teeth. The impact knocked the poker sideways, but it had deflected his blow. The pipe grazed my shoulder, a line of fire, but it wasn't a solid hit. He grunted, surprised by the resistance. I used the moment to push myself up into a crouch. We were face to face in the narrow hall, two animals in a cage. I could smell his sweat, a sour, metallic scent. His eyes were wide, burning with a hatred so pure it was almost a physical force. He feinted with the pipe, and I flinched back. He used my motion to lunge, not with the weapon but with his body. He slammed into me, driving me back against the wall. The back of my head hit the plaster with a dull thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes. His weight was immense, pressing the air from me. One of his hands let go of the pipe and clamped around my throat. His fingers were like steel bands. I gagged, my own hands coming up to claw at his wrist. I was losing. He was stronger. The pipe was pinned between us, useless. My vision started to swim, dark spots dancing at the edges. I still had the poker in my right hand. I couldn't get the leverage to swing it, but I didn't need to. I tightened my grip, turned my wrist and shoved forward with every ounce of strength I had left. The hooked end of the poker found a home. There was a wet, tearing sound. It punched into the soft flesh of his shoulder, just below the collarbone. I felt the resistance of muscle, then a sickening give as the tip drove deep. He screamed. It wasn't a shout of rage. It was a high, animal sound of pure agony. His grip on my throat vanished. He staggered back, pulling away from the poker I still held. The motion ripped the iron from my hand. He clutched at his shoulder, where the poker was now embedded, a black metal hook protruding grotesquely from his jacket. Blood, dark in the dim light, began to soak the fabric around the wound. He stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and pain. Then he looked down at the poker in his own body as if he couldn't comprehend it. He backed away, one step, then another, his eyes never leaving mine. He stumbled past the crooked picture, through the entrance to the living room, and vanished into the deeper shadows beyond. I didn't follow. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. I landed heavily on the floor, my whole body trembling. I sat there in the dark hallway, gasping for air. In. Out. My throat burned. My shoulder ached. My head throbbed. I was alive. After a long minute I looked down. My phone lay on the floor a few feet away, where I dropped it in my fall. The screen was black. As I watched, it flickered to life. A notification had come through. But it wasn't a call or a text from an unknown number. It was from my own contact. The preview was on the lock screen. It wasn't something I had received. It was a confirmation of something I had sent. A message from my number. To my number. The text was a single, chilling line. You heard him. Good. I felt it too. I didn't move from the floor of the hallway for a long time. My body was a live wire, humming with a terror that had nowhere to go. My throat felt scraped raw, each breath a painful rasp. I could feel the thud of my own heart against my ribs. A frantic, unsteady rhythm. He was in the apartment, wounded, hiding. The poker was still in him. The image of it, that black hook buried in his flesh, made my stomach clench. My phone lay screen down on the floorboards. I picked it up. My hand trembled so badly it took 2 tries. The screen was still lit, displaying the sent message confirmation. A message from me, to me. You heard him. Good. I felt it too. I read the words over and over. They didn't make sense. It was impossible. A glitch. A hack. It had to be, but the memory of the hallway stretching, of my own voice screaming a warning from the future, I pushed the thought away. I had to. Thinking about it was like staring into an abyss. Right now there was a man with a piece of my fireplace in his shoulder somewhere in my apartment. A man who had tried to cave my skull in with a pipe. That was real. That was the problem I had to solve. I pushed myself up, using the wall for support. My legs were shaky. A dull ache bloomed at the back of my head where it had hit the plaster. My shoulder burned from where the pipe had grazed it. I strained my ears, listening past the ringing in my head. Silence. Not a normal silence. It was a weighted silence, full of presence. He was here, waiting. Was he in the living room? Hiding behind the couch? Crouched in the kitchen? The apartment, my only sanctuary, had become a hunting ground. A cage. And I didn't know which one of us was the cat. Calling the police was not an option. What would I say? A man broke in, I stabbed him with a fire poker, and now he's hiding somewhere. Also, my apartment keeps changing shape, and I'm getting phone calls from myself. They'd put me in a padded room. If they found him, bleeding from a weapon I had used, I would be the one in cuffs. I was on my own. I needed the poker back. It was my only weapon. And if he had it, he had too. I started to move, one hand braced on the wall. I put each foot down with surgical care, testing the floorboards before putting my weight on them. I crept toward the entrance to the living room, my eyes trying to pierce the gloom. The faint orange glow from the streetlights outside did little to help, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift. Drip. The sound was tiny, almost lost in the hum of the refrigerator. Drip. It came from the kitchen, to my left. Blood. His blood. He was in there. The thought made a cold knot form in my gut. He was cornered. And he was bleeding. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. I flattened myself against the wall between the living room and kitchen doorways, holding my breath. I had to know. I had to see. Drip. Drip. I listened. Drip. My focus sharpened on the sound. I tried to map the apartment in my mind. The living room was the bigger space. More places to hide. The kitchen was a dead end. If he was in there, I could trap him. Maybe I could slam the door, barricade it, wait for morning. Drip. 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 The rhythm was off. It wasn't the steady, metronomic pattern of a leak or a wound. It was erratic. A couple of quick drips, a long pause, then one more. It was wrong. Everything was so wrong. Curiosity, a stupid and deadly impulse, took hold. I had to see. I slid along the wall, my back scraping against the textured paint. I reached the edge of the kitchen doorway and paused, my heart hammering against my sternum. I leaned forward, just an inch, just enough to get an eye past the frame. The kitchen was empty. The overhead light was off. The moonlight coming through the small window over the sink cast a pale, milky sheen on the linoleum floor. I scanned the room. The cheap wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center. The countertops were clear. The shadows under the table were deep, but empty. There was no one there. And there was no blood. The floor was clean. My eyes darted to the sink. The faucet was a dark shape, perfectly still. Not a single drop of water emerged from it. It was bone dry. Then what was making that sound? The toile. My gaze drifted upward. On the wall above the refrigerator, there was a cheap plastic clock, a promotional item from a local radio station that I'd never bothered to take down. The long red second hand was moving. That was the source of the sound. Not a drip, but a tick. A dry, plastic click. I watched it. Click. The hand jumped forward 1 second. Click. It jumped again. Normal. Then it stopped. It froze between the 4 and the 5, motionless for 2, 3, 4 full seconds. My own breathing was louder than the clock. Then, suddenly, click, click, click. It jumped 3 seconds in a single rapid burst. It paused again, then jumped twice more. It wasn't keeping time. It was having a seizure. Time itself was stuttering. The room felt like it was tilting, the air growing thick and heavy. The memory of the stretching hallway rushed back. This wasn't Leo. This wasn't a man. This was something else. The force that had warped my hallway was here, in my kitchen, playing with my clock. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sudden buzz against my leg was so violent, so unexpected, I almost cried out. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. The screen glowed. Ethan. I jabbed the green icon. I didn't say anything, I just held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. A storm of noise erupted from the speaker. It was my voice, but it was being torn apart. It was shredded by static. That sounded less like radio interference, and more like insects chittering, a dry, clicking, whistling sound that scraped at the inside of my skull. Through the chaos, I could make out fragments of my own frantic words. No. Kitchen. A lie. Hide. Under. The voice cut out, replaced by a high-pitched whine. He's coming. Get to the... under the bed. Now. The line went dead. Under the bed. The warning was clear. It was the only instruction I had in a world that had stopped making sense. I didn't question it. I turned, my back still pressed to the wall, and bolted. I flew down the short length of the hall, my only thought to get to the bedroom. The door was closed. I didn't slow down. I hit the brass knob with the palm of my hand and threw my weight against the door. It swung inward. I stumbled into the room, ready to dive for the bed, to pull the covers over me like a child hiding from monsters. But I stopped dead. This wasn't my bedroom. I was standing in my living room. Or a perfect replica of it. But it was wrong. It was inverted. The worn armchair I had used as a barricade was fastened to the ceiling, its legs pointing down at me. The coffee table hung beside it, a magazine still resting on its surface, defying gravity. The rug was on the ceiling, its frayed edges casting strange shadows. Below me, where the ceiling should have been, the bare wood floor stretched out, the cheap light fixture I'd always meant to replace growing out of it like a strange glass mushroom. Dust motes danced in the air, falling upward toward the floor above me. My mind refused to process it. I stood on the threshold. 1 foot in my normal hallway. 1 foot in this impossible, upside-down world. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I could feel my sanity fraying like old rope. I slammed the door. The sound of it crashing shut echoed in the hallway. I leaned back against the wood, my chest heaving, my eyes wide and staring. I had to get out. Out of the hallway, out of the apartment. I turned, ready to run back to the front door, to tear down the barricade and flee into the street. He was there, Leo, standing at the far end of the hall, where it opened into the real living room. He was just a silhouette against the dim light, but it was him. Taller than I remembered. He wasn't holding the pipe. But the dark, ugly shape of the fire poker still protruded from his shoulder. He was unnaturally still, just watching me. He had been there the whole time. The bedroom door, the phone call, all of it. A diversion, a trap, and I had walked right into it. The hallway, which had stretched into infinity moments before, now felt impossibly small. A coffin. There was nowhere to go. To my left, the door to the inverted world. To my right, the bathroom. In front of me, him. I chose the bathroom. I threw myself at the door, turned the flimsy lock on the knob and shoved it shut. The lock made a small, pathetic click. I leaned my full weight against the door, as if that could keep him out. I could hear my own ragged breathing in the small, dark space. The air smelled of mildew and old soap. I heard his footsteps. Thump. A pause. Drag. The sound of his shoe, heavy. And the sound of his other foot, a soft, dragging sound. He was limping. The wound. Thump. Drag. He was taking his time. He was enjoying this. The sounds grew louder, closer. They stopped right outside the door. An inch of wood and cheap paint was all that separated us. I held my breath, bracing for the impact, for the splintering of wood, for the pipe to crash through. The silence stretched. It went on and on. My muscles screamed with tension. Why wasn't he doing anything? Then, a sound. A whisper. It was so close, it seemed to be right beside my ear. It slithered through the wood of the door, a soft, intimate sound that went straight to the bone. And it was my voice. Not a recording. Not a distortion. It was my own voice, a perfect, waking life copy. It had my exact pitch, my exact cadence, the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. It was me, whispering from the other side of the door. You can't hide from yourself. Time lost its edges. It could have been an hour. It could have been 3. The whisper from the other side of the door had been the last sound, and now there was only a ringing in my ears, and the frantic, shallow pattern of my own breathing. I stayed pressed against the door, my muscles locked, my weight the only thing holding the cheap lock in place. My cheek was flat against the cool, painted wood. My eyes were screwed shut. I waited for the crash, for the splintering of the doorframe, for the pipe to smash through the panel inches from my face. It never came. There was nothing. The silence became a physical presence, a weight that settled over the apartment. It was heavier than any sound. I listened. I heard the blood pulsing in my eardrums. I heard the tiny creaks of the building settling. Nothing more. My mind started to work, slowly, through the fog of shock. Was he gone? The poker was still buried in his shoulder. He was bleeding. Maybe he had collapsed. Passed out from the blood loss somewhere in the hallway or the living room. Maybe he stumbled out the way he came in, leaving a trail of blood on the stairs for someone to find in the morning. Hope was a stupid, dangerous thing, but it flickered inside me. A weak, pathetic flame. My throat was a desert. My tongue felt thick and dry. I needed water. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself away from the door. My legs trembled from holding the same position for so long. I took one step, then another, until my hand found the cold porcelain of the sink. I fumbled for the faucet knob in the dark. It was a chrome cross, slick and familiar. I twisted it. A hollow groan came from the pipes, but nothing else. Not a drop. I twisted it the other way. Still nothing. My stomach tightened. I reached for the light switch beside the medicine cabinet. My finger found the plastic toggle. Click. The sound was loud in the small room. The darkness remained complete. Click. Click. Nothing. Shit. He cut the power. He cut the water. This wasn't a man who was bleeding out and collapsing. This was a man who was in control. The silence wasn't an absence of activity. It was a strategy. A trap. The hope that had flickered a moment before was snuffed out. I was back in the cage. I crept back to the door, my bare feet cold on the tiled floor. I lowered myself until I was sitting, my back against the wall next to the doorframe. I didn't want to be a straight shot if he decided to burst through. I peered through the keyhole. It offered a distorted, miniature view of the hallway. Empty. Dark. A sliver of pale orange light from the street spilled in from the living room entrance at the far end. I watched that sliver of light for a long time. It didn't change. It didn't move. Then, it did. A flicker. A stutter of blue-white light from the living room, quick as a camera flash. It threw the shadows in the hall into sharp, momentary relief. I flinched back from the keyhole. My heart hammered. What was that? It happened again. A pulse of cold light. It was accompanied by a sound this time, a low hiss that seeped under the bathroom door, a sound like a million grains of sand being poured onto a hot skillet. The TV. He'd turned on the TV. I pressed my eye back to the keyhole. The hallway was now faintly illuminated by the rhythmic, flickering glow of the television. It wasn't a program. It was static, a frantic, chaotic dance of black and white dots, washing the apartment in its unsteady light. This wasn't Leo. Not just him. A man with a fire poker in his shoulder doesn't stop his assault to turn on the television and set it to a dead channel. The thought was cold and clear. I wasn't dealing with a simple intruder. I was dealing with one problem, Leo, and another, the force that twisted my apartment and my clock. I was trapped between two different kinds of horror. My phone. I had to call for help. I had to try. My hand shook as I pulled it from my pocket. The screen's glow was blinding after the darkness. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the passcode. I stabbed at the phone icon. I hit 911. I pressed the green call button. For a second, nothing happened. Then a message appeared on the screen in stark white letters. No service. I tried again. Same result. He had a jammer. A signal jammer. Who the fuck was this guy? I swiped down, my thumb frantic, and tried to connect to my Wi-Fi. The list was empty. The network name, my familiar backquote, Ethan_home backquote, was gone. He had cut every line I had to the outside world. I was completely, utterly isolated. Defeated, I lowered the phone. My eye went back to the keyhole, to the hissing, dancing static on the TV screen. It held my attention. The random chaos was almost hypnotic. Then, it began to change. The dots didn't seem so random anymore. They started to swirl, to gather, like iron filings drawn by an unseen magnet. The black and white noise coalesced. An image was forming. It was grainy, monochrome, the quality of old surveillance footage. It clarified. I was looking at my own living room, my breath caught in my throat. The camera angle was from high up, near the ceiling in the corner. It showed the couch, the coffee table, the armchair still lying on its side, the barricade I had built at the front door. The room was empty. There was no sign of Leo. I stared, my mind racing. A hidden camera? He planted a hidden camera in my living room. The level of planning, of cold, calculated cruelty was unnerving. He was showing me the room was empty. He was baiting me. I kept watching. Something was wrong with the image, besides its existence. My eyes scanned the blurry feed. I found it. On the wall beside the front door, my calendar hung. It was a cheap thing from the bank, with pictures of covered bridges. From this distance, I couldn't read the small numbers, but I could see the month. I could see the big, blocky day of the week printed at the top of the page. Friday. My blood ran cold. Today was Thursday. Thursday the 12th. I knew it. But the calendar on the television, the one in my own living room on the screen, was turned to Friday the 13th. He was showing me the future. No, that wasn't possible. The rule was human cruelty. He had gone into the living room, while I was cowering in here, and physically turned the page. A prop. A simple, mind-bending prop. He wasn't just trying to kill me. He was trying to dismantle my sense of reality first. I watched the screen, mesmerized by the quiet, empty room from tomorrow. It was a picture of peace. A picture of survival. Maybe it meant I would make it through the night. Then, in the grainy image on the screen, something moved. It was the bathroom door. My door. The white rectangle in the corner of the feed. It was opening. Slowly. A dark crack appeared, widening by the inch. There was no one pushing it. No hand on the knob. It was swinging open on its own. My gaze snapped from the TV on the screen to the real TV in the living room. The blue-white light, the hissing static. It all vanished. Click. The television turned off. The apartment was plunged back into darkness and total silence. My entire body went rigid. I was staring through the keyhole into the now pitch-black hallway, but my attention, my entire being, was focused on the solid wood of the door behind me. I heard it. A sound so small it was almost a feeling. A vibration that traveled through the floor into my bones. Creak. The sound of old wood, of a hinge protesting under slow, deliberate weight. It was coming from behind me. My bathroom door was opening. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. A statue of terror. My back was to it. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing would make it not real. I could feel the air shift as the gap widened. A cool draft touched the back of my neck. He was there. Or something was there. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I waited for the hand on my shoulder, for the pipe against my skull. A whisper came. It was not in the hall, it was not on the other side of the door, it was right next to my ear. So close I could feel the faint, dry puff of air against my skin. The voice was a low rasp, a sound of dust and drought. It was not my voice. It was not Leo's voice. It can't see you. A pause stretched, thin and sharp as a razor's edge. But I can. My body was stone. The whisper was a solvent, dissolving the mortar that held me together. The words were not a threat. They were a statement of fact, a simple, impossible declaration that broke the last rational wire in my brain. Fight or flight. The switch, jammed on freeze for what felt like an eternity, slammed over. Flight. A surge of chemical energy, pure and acrid, flooded my limbs. I didn't turn around. I didn't look at the opening door. I erupted from the floor, throwing myself forward, away from the voice, away from that cool draft on my neck. My shoulder slammed into the edge of the doorframe in my haste, a sharp, stupid pain that I barely registered. I was in the hallway, a dark, narrow canyon leading to the living room. My bare feet slapped against the wooden floorboards, the sound loud and wet. I burst into the living room. The darkness was less complete here. A pale, weak orange glow from the streetlights filtered through the grimy window, casting long, distorted shadows. It gave shapes to the chaos. The overturned armchair, the scattered books, and there, against the far wall, the front door, my barricade. A jumble of my dining table and 2 chairs, wedged between the door and the opposite wall. It looked solid. It looked like a tomb wall. Hope is a drug. It narrowed my vision, focused my entire being on that single point of egress. I scrambled towards it, my hands outstretched, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. I had to get out. I had to get out now. The thought was a frantic drumbeat in my head. Out. 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 I reached the barricade and attacked it. I wasn't thinking, just doing. My fingers dug into the edge of the wooden dining table. It was heavy, heavier than I remembered. I heaved, my back screaming in protest. It scraped against the floor, a sound like tearing canvas. I got it moved a foot, then another. I wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. There was no point in quiet. Whatever was in the bathroom with me, whatever whispered in my ear, it knew where I was. Leo knew where I was. The game was over. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I shoved the second chair aside. It clattered against the wall. One more piece. The first dining chair, its legs jammed hard against the doorknob. I wrenched it free. The sudden release of tension sent me stumbling backward. I fell, my hand landing hard on the floor to catch myself. I was there. The door was clear. Freedom was 3 feet of painted wood and a deadbolt away. As I pushed myself up, my palm came away from the floor sticky. I looked down. It was too dark to see the color, but I didn't need to. I knew the feel. In the faint orange light, I could just make out a dark, wide smear on the floorboards where my hand had been. It wasn't fresh. The edges were dry, flaky, a stain. I froze. My eyes followed the stain. And there, lying next to it, almost invisible in the deep shadow beside the doorframe, was a long, thin shape of metal. The fire poker. He'd dropped it. Or he'd put it there. My stomach turned to ice. He was wounded. Bleeding. But he hadn't stumbled out into the building's main hall. He had bled right here. and he had disarmed himself. A man running for his life doesn't leave his weapon behind. A man setting a trap does. He never left the apartment. The frantic hope evaporated, leaving a cold, hard certainty in its place. I wasn't running from the apartment. I was running deeper into the cage. My head snapped up. I scanned the darkness of the room. The overturned chair. The dark maw of the kitchen entrance. The hallway I had just fled. Nothing moved, but the space felt charged, occupied. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was watching. Where was he? My entire body vibrated. Not from fear, but from a sudden, intense physical sensation. A buzz against my right thigh. It was my phone. In the pocket of my jeans, the vibration was insistent, a low, angry hum against my skin. A call. After everything, a call was getting through. Maybe the jammer failed. Maybe he turned it off. My mind raced with the possibilities. Police. 911 dispatch. A lifeline. I ignored it. There was no time. My priority was the door. The lock. I could answer the phone on the other side of that door, in the hallway, on the stairs, on the street. I lunged for the doorknob. My wet hand slipped on the cold brass. I fumbled, grabbed it again. I turned the deadbolt. A solid, satisfying thunk echoed in the room. I yanked the knob. The door didn't budge. The chain. I forgot the fucking chain. My fingers, clumsy and slick with a mixture of sweat and old blood, scrabbled for the thin metal slide lock. I could feel the small brass nub under my thumb. I pushed it. It didn't move. It was taut. Something was holding it from the outside. No. That wasn't it. It was just stiff. Old. I pushed harder, my breath held tight in my chest. As my focus narrowed to that single, tiny point of resistance, the wall to my left did something impossible. It rippled. I saw it in my peripheral vision. The flat, beige-painted drywall seemed to liquefy for a half-second, like a stone dropped into calm water. The texture of the plaster swirled. I recoiled, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. That wasn't Leo. That was the other thing. The thing from the phone calls. The thing that bent the world. And then the wall bulged outward. It happened fast. A violent organic swelling. The sound was wet and sharp. The crackle of breaking lathe and tearing wallpaper. A fissure split the plaster, and from the darkness within the wall, an arm shot out. It wasn't a phantom. It was solid. Flesh and bone wrapped in a torn, blood-soaked sleeve. It moved with sickening speed, the hand uncurling, fingers reaching for me. I cried out. A strangled, pathetic noise. I tried to back away, but I was cornered, my back pressed against the unyielding front door. The hand clamped around my throat. The grip was iron. It wasn't just strength. It was a desperate, hateful force. I was lifted off my feet, my toes scraping against the floor. The wall groaned and tore further as the rest of him followed the arm. Leo pulled himself out of the ruptured plaster like a grotesque birth. He wasn't a ghost. He was horribly real. His face was a mask of dried blood and fresh gore. The fire poker wound in his shoulder was a black, weeping hole. One of his eyes was swollen shut, but the other was wide, white, and fixed on me with an expression of pure, animalistic fury. He didn't speak. He just squeezed. My airway closed. Black spots danced in my vision. The phone in my pocket stopped vibrating. The call had ended. I clawed at his wrist, my nails scraping uselessly against his skin and the rough fabric of his sleeve. His grip was absolute. He was killing me. Right here. Inches from the door. We crashed to the floor together, a tangle of limbs and desperation. He landed on top of me, his weight driving the air from my lungs in a painful rush. The impact jarred my head against the hardwood. The world swam. His knees were on my chest, pinning me down. Both his hands were at my throat now, thumbs digging deep into my windpipe. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. A high-pitched whistle was the only sound I could make. My lungs burned. They clawed for air that wasn't there. This was it. The end. A cheap, brutal death on the floor of my own apartment. My hands, no longer strong enough to fight his grip, began to roam, pathetically sweeping across the floor around me, searching for a weapon. A stray book. A piece of the broken chair. Anything. My fingers brushed against something. It was flat, thin, and lethally sharp. Glass. A piece of the mirror that had shattered when the armchair went over. My fingers closed around it. I didn't feel the edge slice into my palm. The pain was distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the object in my hand. A weapon. A chance. I tightened my grip, the glass cutting deeper. It felt anchored to my fist. Leo's face was inches from mine, a grimace of effort and triumph. The pressure on my throat intensified. The world was shrinking to a dark tunnel. Now or never. With the last of my strength, a final, convulsive burst of adrenaline, I swung my arm up and around. I wasn't aiming, I was just striking. I put every ounce of my fading consciousness into the motion. The shard of mirror connected with the side of his neck. It made a sound. A soft, wet, tearing noise, followed by a sickening crunch as it hit something solid. Bone or cartilage. I didn't know. I didn't care. Leo's eyes went wide. The fury was replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. The pressure on my throat vanished. A hot, thick liquid sprayed across my face and chest. He made a gurgling sound, a collapsed sigh. His body went limp, its full weight slumping onto me. Then he rolled sideways, landing with a heavy thud on the floor beside me. I lay there, pinned for a moment under his dead arm, and took a breath. It was a shuddering, agonizing gasp that scraped my raw throat. It tasted of blood and dust. I rolled him off me, my movements clumsy and weak. I scrambled away, crab-walking backward, until my back hit the far wall. I sat there, on the floor, in the dark, and just breathed. In, out, in, out. The world slowly returned. The sounds. The smells. The overwhelming metallic stench of his blood, which was pooling on the floorboards in a dark, spreading stain. He was dead. It was over. My gaze fell upon a small rectangle of light on the floor near the wreckage of the barricade. My phone. It had fallen out of my pocket during the struggle. The screen was still lit. It showed a single notification. A missed call. I crawled toward it. My body ached. My throat felt like it was full of gravel. My hand was a bloody mess. I picked up the phone. The screen was smudged with my blood. I stared at the notification. At the identity of the person who had tried to call me in my final moments. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't a name. It wasn't even a number. The caller ID was a single, stark word, glowing in the darkness. Run. I sat against the wall. The wood was cool against my sweating back. The air came in ragged pulls, each one a file rasping against my throat. I did not take my eyes off the shape on the floor. His name was Leo. He was a piece of furniture now, a dark heap in the middle of my living room. The metallic smell was thick, a cloud I was breathing in. It coated my tongue. My hand was a mess. The piece of mirror was still clutched in my fist, welded to me by drying blood. I did not feel the cuts. I felt a dull, heavy throbbing that seemed to pulse in time with my own frantic heartbeat. I had to let go of it. I knew I had to. My fingers would not obey. They were a claw, frozen around the object that had saved me. It was over. The thought was simple, clean. It did not bring relief. It brought nothing. It was just a fact. The thing that had hunted me was dead. I had killed it. I was alive. Then he moved. It was not a large movement. A twitch. His leg, the one nearest me, jerked once, the heel making a soft thud against the wood floor. It was a sound that did not belong in the silence. My entire body went rigid. The air I had just dragged into my lungs caught there. I was not breathing anymore. I was watching. The fighting instinct, The one that had just ebbed away surged back like a tide of hot acid. I was not safe. It was not over, he moaned. A low, wet sound, like air bubbling through a thick liquid. His head shifted. He was trying to lift it from the floor. He was trying to look at me. I moved. I did not get up. I pushed myself along the wall with my good hand and my feet sliding through the grime on the floor. I came to a low crouch, a predator's stance. My body still knew how to do this. My mind was just a passenger. I raised my right hand, the one holding the glass. The shard's sharp edge caught the weak orange light from the window. It was ready. I would not let him get up. I would not let him make another sound. I would drive it into his eye, his other eye, and I would end this for good. He was a few feet away. I gathered my legs under me to lunge, but he wasn't looking at me. His head had lifted maybe an inch off the floor. His one good eye, wide and white, was not focused on his killer. It stared past me, over my shoulder, into the dark corner of the room, by the ruined barricade and the front door. He was not looking at me with rage. The fury was gone. His face, a canvas of torn flesh and blood, was slack with a new expression. It was a look of profound, animal horror. The kind of look a rabbit gives when it sees the shadow of the hawk just before the stoop. A new coldness worked its way up my spine. It was different from the fear I had felt before. This was not the fear of a man with a weapon. This was the fear of the dark, the fear of what you cannot see. My muscles screamed at me to turn around, to look at what had captured the dying gaze of my attacker. My survival instincts screamed louder not to. I stayed frozen in my crouch, my weapon raised, halfway between Leo and the unseen thing in the corner. I was a statue in a tableau of death. What was he seeing? The corner was empty. A mess of splintered chair, leg, and shadow. Nothing more. Then he spoke. Or tried to. The words were not words. They were a slurry of sound and blood, forced from a ruined throat. I'm sorry. The sound hung in the air, thick and terrible. My mind seized on it. Sorry? For what? For trying to kill me? For turning my life into this waking nightmare? The apology was absurd. It was insane. And then I understood. He was not talking to me. The plea was not directed at me. His gaze was still locked on that empty corner. He was apologizing to whatever was standing there. The air in the room changed. It was not just a feeling. It was physical. The temperature dropped several degrees. I could feel it on my exposed skin, goosebumps rising on my arms and the back of my neck. A pressure began to build in the room, a tangible weight that pressed down on my head, on my shoulders. It felt like the air itself was becoming solid. It felt like being 1,000 feet underwater. My ears popped. The drip of water from the kitchen sink, a sound that had been a steady metronome in the background, stopped. There was no sound at all. None. Not my breathing. Not the city outside. Nothing. And in that crushing, absolute absence of sound, Leo began to drag himself across the floor. It was a nightmare in slow motion. He was not moving toward me. He was moving away from me, away from the corner. One arm, the one not pinned beneath him, feebly pawed at the floorboards, fingers smearing through the slick of his own blood. He pulled himself an inch. Another. A thick, dark trail followed him. He was a slug leaving a mortal slime. His one open eye never left the corner, wide with a terror so complete it transcended his own death. He was not trying to escape me. He was trying to escape whatever he saw standing behind me. A deeper dread, cold and sharp, pierced through my adrenaline. I was not the monster in this room anymore. I had to look. I had to know. But turning my back on Leo was suicide. Turning my back on the thing he was seeing felt like a worse kind of death. I was caught. He made another sound. A choking sob. And that broke the spell. I was not going to die here, caught between two horrors. One visible and one not. I was not going to be a spectator to this. I was going to end it. I would end the part one could see. The part one could touch. I did not think. I moved. I lunged across the small space between us. My knee landed hard on his back, forcing a wet gasp from him. He stilled. I was over him now, my shadow covering him. I did not look at his face. I did not want to see that look in his eye. I couldn't. I looked at the side of his head, at his ear, at the matted, bloody hair. I brought my right hand up, and then down. I did not aim for the neck this time. I aimed for the temple. I used all my weight. The shard of mirror punched through the skin and soft tissue with a sickening lack of resistance. It was like pushing a thumb into wet clay. Then it hit the bone underneath. It did not break it. The glass shattered. A spray of tiny, sharp fragments erupted from the point of impact, stinging my face. My hand, now holding only the blunt, thick base of the mirror shard, ground against his skull. Leo's body convulsed once beneath me. A final, violent spasm. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips. And then, he was still. The energy went out of him. He was just weight now. Meat and bone. The thing that had been Leo was gone. Silence rushed back in. Not the pressurized, unnatural silence from before. This was a real silence. The silence of an apartment in the dead of night. I could hear things again. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The distant, lonely wail of a siren miles away. And my own breathing, loud and harsh in my ears. The pressure in the room was gone. The air was just air again. Cold, and stinking of blood, but just air. I stayed there for a long time, kneeling over him. I do not know how long. Time had stopped making sense. I was a machine that had run out of fuel. Eventually the aching in my muscles became too much to ignore. I pulled my knee off his back. I pushed myself away, crawling backward until I hit the overturned armchair. I used it to pull myself up. My legs shook. They barely held my weight. I had survived. I had won. I stood there, swaying, my body a symphony of pain, my throat, my head, my cut hand was now a claw of fire. I looked around the room. It was a disaster zone, my disaster zone, the barricade, the broken chairs, the dark shape on the floor. My eyes fell on the phone still lying near the door. Its screen was dark. The last message it had shown me felt like a transmission from another lifetime. Run. I had not run. I had stayed. I had fought. My gaze drifted back to the body. A pool of blood was spreading slowly from beneath him. A dark, irregular shape on the pale wood of the floor. It soaked into the seams between the boards. It was the last thing he would ever make. The final mark he would leave on the world. I stared at it, my mind numb, and then I saw it. It was in the blood. In the center of the pool, where it was deepest. The red was not just red. Something moved within the color. It was subtle at first. A flicker at the edge of my vision. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, of my exhaustion. I stared harder. It was not a trick. Inside the dark crimson, other colors were being born. They swirled in ways a liquid should not swirl. A deep, impossible violet, like a bruise on reality itself. A sliver of green so dark and vibrant it seemed to drink the light around it. They twisted and folded into each other, not blending but coexisting. And as they swirled, they formed shapes. They were not random patterns, they were geometric. They were angles that hurt to look at, corners that seemed to lead into themselves, lines that connected to nothing. They formed and dissolved in the space of a heartbeat, a silent, kaleidoscopic language written in blood. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. I had killed the man. I had stopped the threat I could see and hear and touch. But the thing in the corner, the thing that had terrified a dying murderer, had not left. It was still here. It was showing me that my victory was meaningless. It was showing me the real color of the world I now inhabited. The horror wasn't over. It was just getting started. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The swirl in the blood was the only thing moving in the room. I stood propped against the armchair, my body a collection of aches held together by skin. The colors were impossible. They shouldn't exist. Not in blood. A purple so deep it was almost black, twisting against a green that burned like chemical fire. They did not mix. They fought. They drew patterns in the pool spreading from Leo's head, geometric shapes that made the space behind my eyes hurt, angles that folded in on themselves, lines that went nowhere. It was a message written in a language I could not comprehend, and I felt a cold certainty that I was not meant to. I had done it. I had survived. The man on my floor proved it. The victory felt like ashes in my mouth. My right hand was a ruin. The skin was peeled back in several places around the broken mirror shard I'd finally pulled free. It was sticky with my blood and his. I let it hang at my side, a dead weight. The throbbing was a low, constant drumbeat against the silence. That unnatural pressure from before was gone. The air was just air again. It carried the coppery tang of blood and the smell of my own sweat. I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. I could hear a car pass on the street below. Normal sounds. The world was still turning. But the colors in the blood told me it was a different world now. My eyes drifted from the body to the phone. It lay near the door. A black rectangle on the floorboards, its screen shattered in a spiderweb pattern. I had ignored it, fought against its warnings, and I had won. I had stayed. A piece of me, the part that was still running on adrenaline, felt a surge of defiant pride. I hadn't run. I had faced the monster and put it down. I was still here. Then the phone screen lit up. It didn't ring. It didn't make a sound. It just lit up, a pale white glow in the dim light of the room. And it vibrated. A single, hard buzz against the wood floor. The sound was small, but it cut through the hum of the refrigerator like a gunshot. My breath hitched. My gaze was locked on it. The name on the screen was the same, Ethan. "Please," I whispered to the empty room. "Stop." It vibrated again. Another short, sharp buzz. A demand, an insistence. My body did not want to move. Every muscle screamed in protest. To walk over there to pick it up felt like walking back into a fire I had just escaped. But I had to know. The question was a hook in my brain. After all this, what more could there be to say? Bifrenophone. I took a step. My legs trembled. Another step. I was walking through the wreckage of the fight. Splintered wood from the chair I'd used as a shield crunched under my boot. I kept my eyes on the phone, not on the body of Leo. I could not look at him again. I reached the phone and bent down, my back screaming. My good hand, my left, closed around the cool, cracked glass. It felt unnervingly solid. Real. I brought it to my face. I slid my thumb across the screen. The call connected. I pressed it to my ear, the cold glass a shock against my skin. I said nothing. I just listened. The line was open. But there was no sound. Not the frantic, panicked breathing of the earlier calls. Not the sound of running, or whimpering, or distant sirens. There was no background noise at all. It was a dead, flat quiet. The kind of quiet you find in a sealed room deep underground. A vacuum. It was more disturbing than any of the screams had been. The screams were a reaction to a threat. This silence felt like the aftermath. It felt like the threat had won. I waited. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic living thing against the dead air in my ear. I could feel sweat tracing a cold path down my temple. Then, a voice spoke. It was my voice. But it was wrong. All wrong. The panic was gone. The hysteria was gone. It was slow, gravelly, as if dragged up from a great depth. It was a voice that had been scraped raw by something more than screaming. It was the sound of utter defeat. "What have you done?" The words were barely a whisper. They were not an accusation. They were a statement of disbelief. A tired inquiry into a catastrophe. My own throat was tight, dry. I worked my jaw, forcing a sound out. My voice came out as a croak. I survived. A noise came from the earpiece. It took me a second to identify it. It was a laugh. A short, sharp, ugly sound with no humor in it. It was the noise of a bone breaking. "Yeah," my other self said, the voice hollow. "You survived. You did it. You did the one thing I spent all night trying to stop you from doing." The words did not make sense. I leaned against the wall by the door, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. My head was light. The room tilted slightly. "What?" I managed. "What are you talking about?" "He was going to kill me." "Yes," the voice on the phone said. The word was flat, final. He was. That was the point. My mind refused to process it. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The logic was broken. You called me to warn me. You told me to hide. You told me to run. I told you to run. The voice repeated, a terrible, patient clarity in its tone now. I never told you to hide. I never told you to fight. I told you to get out. To run and not stop. Did you ever wonder why? I shook my head. A useless gesture. I was talking to myself across time about a dead man on my floor. The strangeness of it was a physical weight. To save me. From him. No, the voice said. And in that single word, I felt a new kind of cold. A cold that had nothing to do with the night air or the shock. It was a deep, internal cold. The calls were never about saving you from him. The calls were about saving everyone else from you. I stared across the room at the dark shape of Leo's body. The words echoed in the silence of my apartment. I felt them land, one by one, like stones dropped into still water. He wasn't the monster, Ethan. He was just a symptom, a loud noise to distract you. He was the dog barking at the door while the real thing crept in through the window. He was a chance, an opportunity. An opportunity for what? I yelled into the phone, my voice cracking. To die? You wanted me to die? Yes, the voice said without hesitation. I wanted you to die. Or I wanted you to run. Far away from here. Far away from this place. At this specific time. His purpose was to either kill you or make you flee. Either one would have worked. Your death here would have been a seal. A lock on a door. It would have been quick. You would have been the price. A small one in the end. The voice paused. I could hear a slow, shaky breath on the other end. But you didn't run. And you didn't die. You stayed. You fought. You won. You planted a flag right in the center of it all. My blood ran cold. I looked down at the floor, at the spreading pool of blood. The impossible colors, the violet and the green, were brighter now. They swirled with a slow, deliberate purpose, drawing their sick geometry. An anchor, the voice on the phone whispered. It was so quiet, I could barely hear it. That's what you did. By surviving right here, right now, you became an anchor. You moored it to this place, to this reality. Before, it was just drifting by. Its influence was a leak, a ripple. That's what the calls were. Echoes. Time bending around its gravity. But you, your guilt, your fear, your life force, all of it concentrated in one spot, fighting to survive. You gave it something to hold on to. You gave it a foothold. I could not breathe. My chest was a knot of ice. The man on the floor. The man who had hunted me, terrorized me, tried to murder me. He was the escape plan. His blade in my throat would have been a mercy. My victory was the true damnation. Every act of survival, barricading the door, grabbing the shard of mirror, fighting back, had been a terrible mistake. I hadn't been fighting for my life. I had been hammering the nails into the world's coffin. I looked at my own hands, the bloody, shaking things that had saved me. They were the instruments of the real disaster. The voice on the phone spoke one last time. It was not a whisper anymore. It was a statement of fact. A final judgment delivered from a future I had just condemned. You're not collateral damage anymore, Ethan. I waited. You are the gate. Click. The line went dead. The phone's screen went dark. I sat there on the floor, in the ruins of my apartment. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at the body of Leo. He wasn't my attacker anymore. He was the last casualty of a war. One had already lost without ever knowing I was fighting it. I looked at the blood on the floor, the swirling alien colors, a vibrant stain on my world. Then, my gaze lifted. I looked past the broken furniture, past the splintered door, and out the window. A thin, gray line had appeared on the horizon. The first hint of light. The sun was coming up. It was the start of the first day. The click of the dead line was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't been allowed to read. The phone in my hand was a dead weight, a slab of glass and plastic, Its screen was dark. I let it slip from my fingers. It hit the wood floor with a flat, final slap. I sat there, wedged between the door and the wall. My body was a map of pain. The sharp, clean pain in my wrecked right hand. The deep, bruised ache in my ribs. The fire in my back. But under it all, a different sensation was spreading. A coldness that had nothing to do with shock. It was a chemical cold, starting in my gut and radiating outwards, turning my blood to sludge. It soaked into my bones. The silence in the apartment was bigger now. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was an active thing. A presence. It pressed in from the corners of the room. It swallowed the low hum of the refrigerator. It was the sound of a vacuum being formed, with me at its center. I had to get up. The thought was not my own. It was a mechanical directive. I put my good hand, my left, flat on the floor. The wood was gritty with dust and something else. I pushed. Pain shot up my arm, through my shoulder, and exploded in my skull. A grunt tore from my throat. My legs were water. They shook and threatened to fold. I pushed again, using the wall for leverage. My skin scraped against the drywall. I got one foot under me, then the other. I stood. The room swayed. For a moment, the floor seemed to tilt, and the body of Leo threatened to slide toward me. I locked my knees. My breathing was loud, each inhale a painful rasp, each exhale a shudder. I looked at the man on my floor. Leo. His name was Leo. He was the chance I had been given. He was the escape hatch. And I had nailed it shut. I had taken the key and broken it. I looked at the pool of blood spreading from his head. The colors were still there, that impossible violet twisting with that burning green. They did not mix. They crawled over each other, forming patterns that made the back of my eyes itch, angles that hurt to look at. My gaze moved from the body to the window. A line of light rested on the horizon, a gray smear against the dark sky. The sun was rising. Day was coming. My feet moved, one after the other. I was a puppet. I walked past the splintered remains of the chair. I stepped over an overturned lamp. I did not feel the throbbing in my hand anymore. I felt nothing but that advancing cold inside me. I was a spectator now. I had done my part. The fight was over. I had won. And now I had a front row seat for what came next. I reached the window. I put my left hand on the cool glass. The city below was still sleeping. A few streetlights cast yellow cones on the empty asphalt. It looked the same view I saw every morning. But the light was changing. The thin gray line on the horizon was not turning to the warm yellow of a typical dawn. It was lightning, but with a different color. A diluted violet. A color, like a fading bruise. It was light without warmth, without promise. It was the color of old meat. It washed over the rooftops, draining the world of its proper color, replacing it with this thin, lifeless imitation. I looked down at the street directly below. A sanitation truck was making its slow, grinding way down the block. Its morning routine. Normal. I held onto that word. Normal. The truck's brakes hissed. It stopped. A man in an orange vest got out and dragged a bin to the back. Then I saw it. The truck's shadow. The new light was coming from the east, from behind the truck. The shadow should have been cast forward, toward me. Instead, it stretched backward, away from the light source. It lay long and dark behind the truck, a defiance of simple physics. The man in the vest did not seem to notice. He hooked the bin, a hydraulic arm lifted it, and for a moment, the man's shadow and the truck's shadow pointed in opposite directions. My eyes followed the lines of the buildings across the street. The apartment block on the corner. I had looked at it 1,000 times. I knew its shape, a simple brick rectangle. But now, it wasn't. The corner that faced my window, the edge where the two walls met, was too sharp. It was an angle that shouldn't exist on a physical structure. It was a line, drawn with a razor, cutting into the pale violet sky. It drew my gaze and held it. Following that line with my eyes felt like pressing on a nerve. It's happening. The words formed in my mouth, a dry whisper. Then came the sound. It was not a city sound. It was not traffic or sirens or construction. It began as a vibration more than a sound. I felt it through the glass of the window, a low thrum that vibrated in the bones of my hand. I felt it through the soles of my boots, a deep hum coming up from the foundations of the building. It was everywhere at once. It grew. It became a tone. A low, constant note. It had no single source. It came from the east with the light. It came from the ground below. It came from the air in the room. I took my hand off the window and pressed it against my ear. It did nothing. I pressed both hands over both ears, pushing hard enough to make my head hurt. The sound was still there. It was louder. It was inside me. That cold in my gut was vibrating with it. I was the source. I was the tuning fork that had been struck. The tones separated. It was not one sound, but millions. A chorus. It was the sound of a sob, drawn out over an infinite distance. It was the sound of a gasp, the collective, simultaneous intake of breath from every living person as they woke up and saw the violet sun, as they saw the shadows fall the wrong way, as they saw the world they knew buckle. It was a wave of pure misery, and it was washing over the planet. It was passing through me. I was the amplifier, the antenna, broadcasting the frequency of the end. I stumbled back from the window, my hand still clamped to my head. The sound was a physical pressure, squeezing my brain. I had to get away from the window, away from the sight of the broken world. I turned, my back hitting the wall hard. I saw the room, my wrecked apartment, the dead man, the blood. My eyes found the mirror on the wall, next to the door. It was an old, cheap thing. I had hit Leo with a chair, sending him crashing into it. The glass was a starburst of cracks, a spiderweb of fractures. But parts of it still held a reflection. I saw myself in the shattered pieces. A dozen versions of me, all broken, a face pale and smeared with drying blood, eyes wide. A stranger. A man who had fought for his life and, in doing so, had taken everything. I needed it to stop. The sound. The sights. I squeezed my eyes shut. For a blessed second there was only darkness. Black. Quiet. The sound was still there, a hum in my skull, but the input from my eyes was gone. There was just the pain in my body, and the noise in my head. Maybe this was it. Maybe I could just stand here, blind to the world, and let it all happen. Just a pillar of meat and bone for the horror to flow through. I could not. I had to know. I opened my eyes. I looked at the mirror. At the fractured image of my face. The man in the glass was not me anymore. He was in the shape of me. He had my hair, matted with sweat. He had my cheek, with the same streak of blood. But his expression was different. While I stood in terror, he was calm. He was watching me. Slowly, the corners of his mouth pulled back. It was not a smile of happiness. It was not a smile of cruelty. It was emotion. A twitch of muscles pulling skin over teeth. It was an expression of arrival. Of recognition. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my lungs. My heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop. I stared into the eyes of the man in the mirror. My eyes, but they weren't my eyes. In the center of each iris, where the pupil should have been, there was something else. A small collection of lights. They were not reflections from the room. They were tiny, cold points of white. They spun, slowly. Cinders from a dying fire. They didn't reflect the violet dawn. They drank it. They were holes. Tiny punctures in the world, looking out from inside my own face. The thing in the mirror looked at me. It saw me. And through me, it saw its new home. The gate was open. I was not screaming. I was not running. I was just a body, propped up by a wall, watching. The pain in my hand, the ache in my bones, the sound of a world in sorrow, it was all just background noise now. There was only the face in the mirror and the cold spinning stars in its eyes. The horror wasn't what it would do. The horror was that I was still here, alive. Trapped in the driver's seat. I was the first one to see it. I was the doorman. I was patient zero. And I would have to watch every single moment of what came next.